You're on, Jerry. Well, good evening. It's nice to be here. I'm really going to apologize. I forgot to bring my clicker, and I think I'm supposed to got it or something here.
This guy right here behind me, he can make clicking sounds.
I was repacking my bag. Was only to bring some camera gear, and I'm going to show you a couple of pieces here. Some of you may not be familiar with it. This is called a patty pod. You can hook any tripod that you want to. This is great for macro photography. It's also great for bird photography at the beach. Because if you're at the beach and want to get some of those really great low shots, go to Walmart, buy a really cheap frisbee. Just take the patty pod with you, and you'll find one where it almost fits in there perfectly. And now you can easily work for that. But it's great for macro photography. If you're on uneven surfaces, it comes with these little things in surround to have legs to adjust the height. So it is a tremendous thing.
Where you got the sand on the beach?
That's why the frisbee.
Oh,
The frisbee keeps the sand off the ear. This is called a focusing rail. You put the camera here with a macro lens, get it approximately in focus, and then with little tiny turns here, you turn this back and forth so that if your object's here, just by your object's there, just by turning that, so they can see the face, you're going to be able to. It helps with focus. When focus is critical. The other piece of the equipment that is so important are extension tubes. And I'm surprised how many people are not familiar with them. They're very cheap. These have all the electronics, but they're so cheap because there's no glass. All they do is move the lens out further from the camera, which makes it focus much, much closer. So those are some of the things. I'm going to get started talking about close-up photography. It's one of the bird photography and close-up photography are two of the things I really love. And so when it comes to close-up photography, people usually like to do things like, some people put jewelry or coins. Some do abstracts. I like to do nature. And that comes down to, for most people, to flowers and insects. Not everybody, but a lot. And just to, okay, now when I'm clicking, this isn't. I'm telling it to move and it's not. Subtitles there's all kinds of things on my screen that don't show there. Yes. I can do it this way. I can do it using the mouse. I don't seem to be able to. Yeah, I can do it that way too. I'm not primarily a flower photographer, but here are a couple of pictures I did take this last week. Anybody know this flower? It's called a dayflower, and it's very small. It's about half the size of a dime. And this is a focus stack. I'll talk about focus stacking later. Focus stack allows you to keep the background totally out of focus, and you get the object very sharply in focus. And I took this next picture just last week. Right now, if you ride along and you see these little gullies on the side that are all dry but sort of damp in the bottom, sometimes it look like a little fine purple carpet in there. And that's often, if it's very low, that's this flower, lobelia. And literally, you could take 4 lobelia flowers and put them two here, and set them on a dime and still see the edges of the dime. Very tiny, so a tremendous something for close-up photography. Now, here the first tip I would give you for close-up for those who aren't into it is this. Learn to use the gear you have so you know what gear you'll truly need. Sometimes people spend all kinds of money and discover, I didn't need to do that. I've got a lens that will already do that. And as photographers, we're all subject to a condition called gear acquisition syndrome. And that can get really expensive. A friend of mine, a guy asked me a few weeks ago, he said, well, what's it? is it hard to get into nature photography? And I was being a smart aleck. I said, oh, no. The gear's extremely cheap and you master everything right away. And I told him, I said, hey, don't believe a word of that. But gear acquisition syndrome is a real problem. So learn what gear you have and how to use it. Then you can better figure out what gear to buy. Now, I'm going to be doing the rest of this on insects as examples for close-up photography. And I taught both college biology and high school chemistry for many years. And there's a great story I love. It happened about 70 years ago. And it was in Great Britain. And they love to have these dinners where they get these different royal societies together of all these keen minds. And they had such a dinner. And two people who were sitting side by side were the Archbishop of Canterbury. So automatically you got one of the world's most distinguished and leading clerics. And sitting beside him was JBS Haldane. He died in 1964, but he was one of the world's leading evolutionary biologists. And the Archbishop of Canterbury asked Dr. Haldane, tell me, sir, in all of your study of creation, what have you learned about the creator? And JBS Haldane said, he must love beetles. Folks, 25% of all animal species are beetles. Actually, it's about 23 to 24%. But the fact is, if you lined up one of every animal species on Earth, almost one out of every four would be beetle. That's how abundant they are. And this one is a clown beetle. If you don't recognize what it's sitting on, it's because you don't usually see it that close. You know, when you let your grass grow and you don't mow it, these little scrapes come up, two little things sticking out that have seeds on them. That's one of those little things sticking out. That's how tiny that beetle is. And that is literally the flower of grass. Grass is a flowering plant. It just doesn't make flower petals, but you can see the floral parts. And so very tiny little clown beetle. This one right here is a blister beetle. It has a lot of alkaloids in its body. So not many things eat it. That makes it taste bad. It can actually cause burns in the mouth. But this one is actually probably as big as a quarter. He would go across a quarter, so not nearly as small as some of the others. And then everybody loves this particular beetle, what we call ladybugs. And these are just absolutely gorgeous. They're almost everybody's favorite. Here's the thing about insects. Insects are the most abundant animal on Earth. That means you got to eat some of the most abundant stuff on Earth. Think about it. That means insects mainly eat two things. Usually they eat one or the other, not both. They either eat plants or they eat other insects. If you're the most abundant thing on Earth, you got to eat some of the most abundant stuff on Earth. It's just that simple. Ladybugs, of course, eat other insects. They eat aphids. So they're great to have in your garden because aphids can really damage plants. Now, here's the second thing. If you really get into macro photography and want to do a lot of close-up and even true macro is defined as when you're shooting at what's called 1-to-1. That means if you have a full-size camera sensor, a camera with a sensor the same size as a 35 millimeter negative, that sensor's almost 1.5 inches long and it's just under 1 inch tall. It means that if something's 1 inch in size, you focus so close, the image on that film or on that sensor is also 1 inch. That's what it means 1-to-1. That's true macro. Most of us just do close-up. That is 2-to-1. That means that if that beetle is 1/4 of an inch wide, he's showing up as a 1/2 inch on my sensor because it's a 2-to-1 image. So that's a macro lens plus an extension tube. But if you're really going to get into it, you need to invest in a quality macro lens, some extension tubes if you want to do real macro, and possibly a focusing rail. It is extremely hard to focus on something that small. You're trying to turn the focusing or expecting the auto to do it. It's often best just to set it already to as close as it will focus. Move your camera to approximately in focus, then use the focusing rail to move the camera back and forth precisely till you lock it in on focus. And by the way, except for one picture, all these are live insects. And except for one picture, a second picture, all of them are out in nature. I'll tell you which two aren't. Well, I got one dead insect picture in here. One picture of an insect that I took it because he was in my house. Okay. After beetles, there are 4 giant groups of insects. There are 26 to 30, depending on who you listen to for classification. Orders of insects. You remember kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species from when you took biology, animal kingdom, all that. Well, insects are all in the class Insecta and the phylum Arthropoda, and there are 26 orders. That's the traditional number. Some people think there are a few more. But almost all of them are in one of 4 orders. There are 4 gigantic orders. Beetles are by far the biggest. Another one of those mega orders is butterflies and moths, order Lepidoptera. Here's one of my favorite butterfly pictures I've ever had the good fortune to take. This is called a dainty sulfur. This is called a dainty sulfur, and it is a focus stack, which has allowed me to get every part of the insect in focus, but keep the background totally out of focus. As I said, I'll tell you sort of show you how that's done in a series of pictures later. But butterflies are why so many people love insects. They don't love insects because of mosquitoes, fleas, or roaches. They love them because of butterflies. I gave a talk just Thursday of last week, I think it was, at the Peace River Butterfly Society. And there are butterfly societies all over the place. So they're great to take this particular dainty sulfur is a rather small butterfly. If you remember $50 coins, it's much smaller than a $50 coin. But it's still a beautiful, beautiful thing. My butterfly book, I've got a book on the identification of North American butterflies. 80% of the book is on skippers. Skippers make, well, I'm sorry, not 80%. I think I missed, excuse me. About 30%. This is by far the largest group of butterflies. What's the difference between a butterfly and a moth? Well, some people say, well, moths fly at night. A lot of moths fly in the daytime. Some people say, well, moths aren't as colorful. Some moths are amazingly colorful. All butterflies, look at the antennae. On the end, they're little knobs. All butterflies have antennae with little knobs. Sometimes the knob is elongated. Sometimes it's sort of hooked in shape. But a moth has any kind of antennae except those with knobs. And there are a lot more moths than butterflies. If you have a book on both butterflies and moths, 80% of the book's on moths. There are approximately 4 or 5 species of moth for every 1 species of butterfly in the United States. But this is a skipper, and it's on a thistle. So another nice thing. And this brings me to the next tip. When you're photographing insects, try to get on eye level with them. Now, that was easy on something like this. I literally took that photograph out my car window at Micah State Park. I pulled up and started to get out of the car to do some photography, and there was a thistle plant about 5 feet away, and that black swallowtail was on it. And that was not taken with a macro lens. One of the main things I use for my photography of large insects, and that's a fairly decent sized butterfly, is a 300 millimeter lens with a 1.4 teleconverter and an extension tube to focus a little closer. And that way, from 5 feet, you get shots like that. If I'd gotten out trying to walk closer to it with a macro lens, it may well flown away. So that's great. You know why? Because some of us have trouble getting down to get on eye level. But it's great when it's on a thistle that's 4 feet tall and even with your car window. So that works at times. Sometimes you get lucky. Now, this is one of my favorite butterflies. There are several different species of these. They're called blues. And this one is a Cassius blue. And on that one, I'm laying flat on my stomach because it is literally 2 or 3 inches off the ground. Once again, that's a focus tag. These little things fly frantically. and you think they'll never light, but when they do light, they often sit very still for quite a long time. I mean, if you flew, they're literally doing this everywhere. I mean, they're just so fast. It's called a blue. You see the little blue trim? This is once again getting on eye level. Now, here's another picture of a blue that I deliberately didn't get on eye level. You rarely get to see them with their wings spread where you can see the color, but that's really why they're called blues there. They have blue wings on the upper side. And since I wanted that image, since they only open and close those wings mainly in the morning, the rest of the day they tend to keep them folded. And I wanted a picture of it showing the blue. And that again is a focus stack. Focus stacking is great because you can get sharp images. But that brings us to the next thing. Most insects, including most butterflies, many insects, most butterflies can be photographed with a telephoto lens. A 70 to 200. I use both Olympus and Nikon. I've been a Nikon shooter for 40 years. I became an Olympus shooter in 2017, a few months after I had a heart attack, and I went out to the Rocky Mountains, and I was carrying a Nikon D810, which is a big, heavy camera, and I was carrying a 70 to 200 2.8 lens and a 24 to 70 2.8 lens and a macro lens, a 105 macro and a 200 macro. And the weight was that my wife had to carry my backpack for me. I just had not recovered. So I went and bought the Olympus gear. Well, as I've gotten healthier, I can use the Nikon again a lot. But I'm really a big fan of the Olympus gear for macro photography. For one thing, if I shoot something life size, now the sensor's smaller. It's a 2x crop conversion factor. So the sensor's much smaller. But if I shoot something at life size on that sensor, if you're using a full-size camera, you'd have to shoot it at 2 times life size to get the same image on the sensor because of that small sensor. So that's kind of nice. But it can save you a lot of money. Odds are you already have a 70 to 200. Maybe you have a 70 to 300 or a 28 to 300, something like that. With extension tubes, it will focus very close and you can get a lot of nice images. Here is another sulfur. This one is a yellow barred. And once again, getting down on eye level. Same species. Just getting down right there and trying to keep that background out of focus. The other thing, you know the difference between being an artist like a painter and a photographer? A painter has to start with a blank canvas and decide what to add to the canvas. Our job is to take away all we can so that we can focus on what we want in the image. So we try to find ways to get them isolated like that. I took this picture Friday. I sat down in a group of wildflowers by the side of the road called Hyde's Alba. That's when it's just about shot. And the first 10, 15 minutes, all the insects left. But after a few minutes, sit still for 15 minutes, they all came back. And it's easy to get those eye level shots. And I actually would show some flowers where I would have a background that was not going to be cluttered and distracting. That doesn't mean when something lit and I turn my camera toward it and it's distracting background that it didn't take the picture. But the idea in photography is almost always, what can I eliminate from the picture so that I really emphasize my subject? Yes, sir.
I have a question on this.
Sure, Bob.
Can you tell us approximately how far away was your lens with the subject? And what kind of extension tube did you have on that lens?
That is not an extension tube. That is the macro. It's a 90 millimeter macro lens, but it's being taken on the Olympus, which means with the 2x crop factor, it's the equivalent of a 180 millimeter lens. And that Olympus lens will take a teleconverter. It's actually made to take the Olympus teleconverter. And so I've got the teleconverter on there, the 2x one, that makes it the equivalent of a 360 millimeter lens. So that's the lens. But actually, I'm about a foot away it's about a foot from the front element of the lens, which makes probably about 18 to 20 inches from the focal plane.
Jerry, what are your opportunities on these shots?
That is not that one right there. I was not focus stacking. This particular butterfly doesn't sit still. That was shot at F11. But F11, here's the other thing. When you have used a crop sensor for exposure, F11's F11. But for depth of field, you multiply the depth of field by 1.4 if that's a crop factor, or 1.5 or 2. This is a 2x crop factor, so it's equivalent of F22, which is why you have so much depth of field. Fairly good. That is a butterfly called a cabbage butterfly. Cabbages and sulfurs are in the same family. Some people call cabbage butterflies. Are also sometimes called whites. But wonderful little butterflies. Now there's one. I put that in there because that's one where it's just too cluttered. It's not a bad shot at the insect, but there's a lot of things in there to attract your attention. Now, for an environmental shot, that might be fine, but it really doesn't display the insect as well as something like that. That's another skipper. I love the skippers. They're tremendous little butterflies. They're huge numbers of species, and some of them are called lone-tailed skippers. You can see why. And this picture, you could have taken a lawn chair. I went to a Laetris patch. Laetris is a flower that blooms in the autumn, and I went to a patch that just grows in nature, and it's hot. The height's such that if I take a lawn chair, I sit in the lawn chair, set up, just after about 30 minutes, 20 to 30 minutes, all the insects come back if you're sitting still, and you can get shots like this. Another picture on, by the way, the thistle is just starting to bloom in different places. So for about a month, you're going to be able to go out and stand up and be right on eye level with the insects instead of needing to get down on your stomach. The other thing is look for flowers that climb, a vine that climbs, and a lot of times that way you don't have to worry about getting down. I'm fortunate. I actually can get up better and get down. Getting down is a little harder for me because old knee joints don't want to bend like they used to. But just enjoy that. Now, do you see why that's not a butterfly?
Yeah.
No knobs on the end of those antennae. So this is a little moth. That is one I've not identified yet. But since that is a very small little flower, a little yellow flower about as big as a quarter, you can imagine how small that insect is. Here's another kind of moth, very beautiful. Some moths are truly colorful and beautiful and fly in the daytime. Not all moths are night dwellers. And once again, no knobs on the end of the antennae. Here's another moth called a yellow collared moth. And you can see the antennae have comb-like edges along. But butterflies and moths, the third gigantic order are the bees, wasp, and ants. Bees, wasp, and ants. And I love to photograph these. Here's something some people don't understand. The honeybee is not native. It was brought in the 1600s by settlers, because when word got back to Europe, there are no honeybees in North America. The farmers, so many of them were farmers, they brought honeybees with them. And today, of course, they're just everywhere. Not a native species, but honeybees are just tremendous, beautiful things. And once you'll be still sitting in a flower patch, they will come and land so close to you, you actually have to lean back to get in focus because it's just so close sometimes. And I have never had one bother me when I'm just sitting there quiet. Now, you got to watch where you put your hand, because you may, when you were a kid, you got stung a lot barefooted probably because you stepped on them or something. But they are just beautiful. And here's another thing about honeybees. Look at the eyes. It looks like hair growing out of the eyes. You and I find that an incredibly discomforting thought. But you see the hairs growing right out of the eyes. This is a native bee. It is a megachilid, which means large jaw. These bees have large head relative to the body. It's a very small bee, much smaller than a honeybee. But look how much pollen is over its body. Watch honeybees. They visit a flower, stay a few seconds, move. when these guys come to a flower, disturb it, he may be on the flower for a minute, minute and a half. I mean, they work that flower, and you can see the bees just getting covered with all kinds of pollen. But this is one of our native bees. Here's another, that's the same species. Here's one called a leafcutter bee. It is a kind of carpenter bee. They do make little holes in wood. These are solitary bees. That is, they don't make these nests. A bunch of them stay together. And if you're going through the woods and you see some leaves that look like someone took a hole punch and punched a perfect round hole, that's usually a leafcutter bee. Usually it's right near the edge, often on the edge, and they work that, and then they fly, stuff it in their little hole, chew it up, and use it as part of the medium, that little hole. These it's like a drill bit with a hole in there. It's a couple of inches deep. They can make their own when they have to. They like to find them already made. Some people just get a big block of wood, about a 4 to 6 inch thick block, drill holes, put it up, and these things find their way in there, and you have them right there in your yard. But this one is, you can see how big the head is here. Very large head. It's also a mega chili. But these are wonderful little bees, and it's fun to watch them work the flowers. Now, that would be a pretty good picture, but see, there's a real distracting element in the background. Now, some of you are probably so good at Photoshop, you can get that out with no trouble. For me, I just thought, the heck with it. I try to find the one where I can get the shot without the distracting element in the background. But these are wonderful bees. This is a sweat bee. Now, most of us think of sweat bees as looking like this. Now, that one is a blue and green, same species, just a few of them are blue instead of green. That is female. Most people call it the green sweat bee, but that one you call it the blue. The male, though, excuse me, I'm hitting the wrong arrow key. Still hitting the arrow key. The male, I'm still hitting the wrong, there it is. The male has a black and white or yellow and black abdomen, same species. And these sweat bees, they're really, they're neat. They're beautiful. And they're so metallic. This one is called the brown wing sweat bee because of the brown wings. Some of them have different colored wings. You don't find that many of the females that are blue. It's just a genetic variant, just like you and I are not all the same shade of whatever color we are. Now, here's one where I use flash. This is called a thread-waisted wasp. And you see how tiny that waist is? It comes out of the back of the thorax, and he's holding that abdomen up, but you have this little thin waist. That is really harsh. And when I saw that on the back of the camera, using the same wasp on the same plant, I just barely moved the plant. This was early in the morning. He was not going to move. It was chilly. It was actually holding on to the plant. You can see it in this next picture better. Well, I'm going to get to it there. Oh, the point is to learn to use flash because that was a bad example of using it. Can you see how the jaws are locked into the plant? And it sleeps that way. And all I did was, since I knew it was a chilly morning, he was covered in dew, he was pretty in a stupor, I just literally found something, a stick, propped it against the little stalk it was on to move it slightly, where instead of shadow behind it, there was some grass and things behind it. Because and I also put a diffuser on the flash. First picture, I thought, I better grab this in a hurry. I didn't put a diffuser on the flash. But learn to use flash. It can be a tremendous help because your flash may fire at 8,000th of a second. That can really freeze motion for you. Here is the thread waist wasp again. That one is in bright sun. That was just a grab shot. But I have never seen anyone stung by these wasps. I've seen people catch them and hold them in their hand and look at them. I've never seen one sting anybody. Not saying that won't happen. But wasps can be very beautiful, very colorful. Wasps are very different. Bees tend to be herbivores. They eat the pollen. When wasps go to flowers, they do nectar. They drink the nectar. But they also hunt insects. Wasps are actually carnivores. They're meat eaters. And the other big difference between a wasp, most bees, if they sting you, they die. Stinger, when they try to, it just rips out their intestine. Wasp, their stinger doesn't do that. They can sting you several times and fly away and be very happy. But notice, if you look on the sort of lower right-hand side, you see the shadow of a petal of flower. That's straight sun. This one's straight sun. But a lot of times, there's no shadow anywhere. You're in high shade. Well, when you're in high shade, that's great. You don't have the trouble with shadows. That is a cicada killer wasp. These cicadas come out big. You'll see these things. They'll sting them, which doesn't tend to kill them. It paralyzes them. Then you only see them dragging them. They nest underground, drag them to a hole and take them down in there. And that paralyzed caterpillar, cicada, will be food for their young. Terrible fate sounds like for the cicada. But these wasps are quite large. They've never bothered me. But because when you're working in open shade and you still need a fast shutter speed, they're moving, you still need a decent depth of field. That is not a focus stack. That means you have to go to high ISO. Don't be afraid of high ISO. If your camera's within 5 years old, especially if it's newer, you've probably got a sensor and a processor that will do a lot to handle ISO. We used to call it grain on film, but now we call it noise, the same kind of thing that happens at high ISO. And it's far better to get a noisy image where I can deal with the noise in post-processing than to use a slower shutter speed, keep the ISO and get a blurred image or even no image. So there are programs today. I use one called Topaz Photo AI for auto intel, and it reduces noise amazingly. It's a Lightroom plug-in. Just export the picture to Lightroom with a click from Lightroom to it with a click. Tell it to apply noise reduction. Save it, and it automatically takes you back to a TIFF copy of that in Lightroom, and the noise is just gone. So don't be afraid of the noise. Here's another one. Very, very heavy shade, actually. This little wasp, but with the noise reduction today, it's great. Wasp can be very beautiful. This is a feather-legged wasp. See the little fat hairs on the legs that are like feathers? And not only have bees and wasps, we got ants. This is the Florida carpenter ant. And you think, those things, I see them, they're running all over the place. Let me give you a little tip. I saw these on the plant. I took a bottle of sugar water, not super strong, sprayed it on the leaf. It took them about 5 minutes to find it. And if I used a really heavy dose of sugar, when the water started evaporating, because it's a fine mist, it looked like snow on the leaf. I just put such a thin little coating of sugar on there, but when they got on that leaf, they stayed. And I was able to get a couple of shots here of the ant. And you know how tiny these things are. That is at least a 2x image. The fourth giant order, flies, which also includes mosquitoes and gnats and oceums, everybody's favorite stuff. But the flies I'm talking about here are flower flies. I know that looks a lot like a bee, but look at the antennae. Flies have those little short, almost like little fatty projections for antennae. And this is a flower fly. It pollinates the flower. It feeds on pollen. It nectars on it. It is easily mistaken for a bee. Some flower flies you're not going to mistake for a bee. That's just one that looks much more like a typical fly. But these right here are called plushbacks, and they're found in much of North America. You'll find them all over the flowers. There are several species. Usually it behaves so much like a bee. A lot of times you don't realize you got a picture of a fly when you get home and see it on the computer. Sometimes you don't pick that up on the back screen. But wonderful things. And some of them are tiny. Once again, that is one of those little grass seed heads or flowers. And you can see how tiny that one is. This picture I took Friday. And I've never seen this particular fly before. look at the abdomen. Looks like a porcupine. And this fly it's a flower fly, but it lays its eggs on certain species of caterpillars, including tomato hornworm, which is actually a caterpillar. And the other day I saw a caterpillar and it had several bumps on its back, and each one of those was an egg laid by a fly. And when the larvae hatch, the maggot goes into the caterpillar's body and feeds on it and kills the caterpillar. It's natural insect control. Once again, over half of all insects eat insects. The fly as an adult doesn't eat insects, but the larvae do. A lot of larvae do that. And then there's some flies that don't look like flies. This is a robber fly. These are pretty big. They kill and eat other insects. I did not bring the picture because it's not a really good picture, but this one caught a dragonfly about 4 times its size, killed it and ate it. And the reason it's not a good picture is he flew into tall grass, and there was no way I could get a picture except with all kinds of grass in the way. I took the pictures anyway, but a very big fly. And that fly, I was sitting still. It must have gotten curious. It's a strange thing what animals will do, even insects. It lit. It was flying by. They're really loud. They make a big buzzing noise. It probably lit 10 feet from me. This was taken with my 300 millimeter lens and an extension tube. I was sitting on the ground with my legs out in front of me. I can't sit Indian style anymore. And it came all the way that close looking at me, and it just sat there. So that's actually a focus stack that allowed it to get very close. Okay, here's the insect. This is another robber fly. This one was in my house. I heard it buzzing around, and bless its heart, it buzzed for hours. And it got so exhausted, it finally perched, actually on a towel. And I took the potted plant and kept touching it, and it crawled off the towel leaf. And then I was able to photograph it. The background is my gray shirt that I just hung over a chair, hung behind it, behind the potted plant, because I really didn't want you to see, all the stuff. It kind of looks natural that way. But this is another species of robber fly. It was so tired, and once it was on the plant, after I photographed it, I carefully picked it up, carried it outside, and then let it fly away. And this last one is called a bee fly. It is a fly, not a bee, but it looks and behaves a lot like a bee, often mistaken for a bumblebee because of the hairy body. Now, those are the 4 giant orders. Then you've got a group of insects called true bugs. They do not undergo metamorphosis. They don't make the eggs don't hatch out into worms like larvae or caterpillars. They hatch out into tiny, immature versions of the adult. And this is an immature one. And this is called a red bug. I'll get to it in a minute. This is a stink bug, good old stink bug, on top of a thistle, just the flower bud before it opens. This one is called a shield bug, and that is on a flower called southern guara. In a southern guara flower, those flower buds are probably half a centimeter at the most in size, so you can tell how really tiny that bug is. Here's the red bug again. The young ones, they're called hemiptera, which means half wing. And it's not because they have half-sized wings, but half their life they have small wings. Each they grow, the wings finally grow to full size where they can fly. At this point, it couldn't even fly. Red bug slough here in Sarasota, it's named after these bugs. Red bugs. It's also called a cotton stainer. Back in the days when there were a lot of cotton sale, they didn't like these because they got on the cotton bolls, pooped, left big stains. Big stains. Here's an adult. And both of those, again, are focus stacks. Notice it's sharp front to back, which would require a really tiny aperture like 16 or 22. That would have started bringing in distractions from the background. And this is another one that's a focus stack. And then the last order, the 6th order of insects I'm going to talk about, the 26 are dragonflies and damselflies. These are my favorites. I did not know that there's a lot of jewelry of dragonflies. My wife, when I started talking to her about dragonflies, had 2 little pendants of dragonflies, just like she does in butterflies. Dragonflies, when they land, spread their wings out. The eyes are so big they touch on the top. Damselflies, when they land, fold their wings up, and their big old eyes are on each side of the head with a big gap in between. Damselflies, amazing insects. So here's another suggestion. Learn to do focus bracketing, focus stacking. Focus bracketing is where you focus at several points on the object, either by moving the camera back and forth or turning the focusing ring. And then the stacking is putting them in software and post-processing, where it will take all the sharp parts and put them together in one image. This is a focus stack, and I want to show you the series of images I made. This one, I did not have my Olympus. That's with my Nikon. I had my 200 millimeter macro lens, which on my new mirrorless camera will not focus automatically. It's strictly manual. But you can still do focus stacks that way. Here was the first image I took. Notice the head's in focus and a little bit of the thorax, and the rest of the body's totally out of focus. This is the last image I took. There were 9 in between, 11 photos in all. And that, you can see the head's totally out of focus, but the back part of the abdomen is. You can't see the detail. There's all 11 images. Just export those into Photoshop as layers and then tell it to stack the layers. And when you get through, you've got that image. The back, I could have shot f/22, but that would have made those pieces of grass in the back so sharp they'd be very distracting. Here you can see the first shot in the final image. What a difference photo stacking makes. And focus stacking is great because a lot of insects will sit still for a while. All these next several images are focus stacks. That is a Ramber's, called a Ramber's damselfly. And I probably shouldn't mention this. I don't know my audience that well. But when these things mate, once the male couples with the female, that usually lasts 14 to 18 hours. And I don't know if I feel sorry for her or if I feel so proud for him. But it's really, I mean, that's just not normal in the animal kingdom at all. Nowhere. This is a picture of Ramber's mating. The female is actually the brown one. The male is the male grabs that female. He's got little pinchers on the back of his abdomen by the neck. And then she has to bring her abdomen up to his. Before he mates with her, his sperm actually comes out of that tip of the abdomen. He puts it up against a little receptacle on his abdomen, on his thorax, and it's called auto-insemination. He puts the sperm in that little cavity. Then he'll hold the female, and then she has to go and receive the sperm. And then she, of course, then they often fly around together, hooked together for a while. This was at Mica River. I was on the bank. I saw them. And I kept trying to get close. They'd fly, but they wouldn't unhook, and they'd only fly inches because he was really not worried about me. And I actually aggravated him until he flew on a little limb where there was no obstacles. And I just laid down on the ground and took focus stacks of it. Here's another focus stack. Now that is such a close-up that I only wanted the head and the thorax in focus. But that is actually a handheld focus stack. Ordinarily, you couldn't do that. But it must have eaten a lot and didn't want to fly. And it was on a log, and the log was about at my chest. I literally just put the lens hood of my camera on the log and kept inching forward and taking pictures until I got that close. Then I just took a series of pictures focused at those different points and put them together. You can even get really close and get detail with that kind of thing. But here's some more focus stacked images that keep the background out of nice blurred background. It doesn't distract. This is a beautiful, beautiful dragonfly that's actually from Asia, but now found around the world. And that's because the insect larvae are called naiads. They're in the water. And they really love to live among the roots of a lot of floating aquatic plants. And as aquatic plants are shipped around the world, these things show up. Most places, they were in Ohio last year. Any that were there during the summer died off in the winter. That's much too cold. So the only time you'd see them in a place like Ohio or Michigan, where someone brought in the plants just for so recently, the naiad transforms, but the water's too cold. They're not going to be able to breed, but they do in Florida. So as long as you're in tropical and subtropical areas, this thing is just about spread around the world now because of the popularity of buying and transporting plants. Here's one where I'm laying on my stomach. Again, that little sticky zone. I wish it was 4 feet high. It was about 6 inches off the ground. But that's called a seaside dragonlet. And focus stag, notice you can't really, there was no reason to go all the way to the tip of the abdomen. I just wanted to. Really, if you got the head and the wings sharp, you're good to go. But you don't have to focus stack. This was like the robber fly. This is a damselfly called a variable dancer. And once again, I was sitting on the ground. I was taking pictures, and this thing first lit 20 feet from me. And in the next hour, it got that close. That is about 6 feet from me. That is taken with my 300 millimeter lens and a set of extension tubes so it would focus closer. Not a focus stack. It wouldn't sit still that long. Here's one where you don't have to focus stack. I could get the body of the dragonfly parallel to the sensor. Now you don't have to worry about focus stacking. The wing closest to me is quite out of focus, but the other two wings, they're usually spread out. The wind was blowing and it was making that wing kind of stand up. So even got the wings pretty sharp. That is called a roseate skimmer. Very beautiful dragonfly, very common. Here's a eastern amber wing. That's not a focus stack. Notice the body's parallel. This one is a focus stack. And I wanted to show you this picture because I'm going to show you now the dead insect. I was out at Micah Park on the boardwalk, and I was just taking some pictures, and somebody said, "Oh, somebody stepped on and smashed a bug." And I looked, and it was a dead eastern amber wing. But the colors were bright. Dragonflies, their colors fade in a hurry when they die. And it hadn't been stepped on at all. It's a tiny little insect. It's about the size of a bee. So I took it, and I just set it on a bench, and I did a focus stack. All I wanted was the head, the antennae, the face, and the eyes. And when I saw that picture on the back of my camera, pictures, once I looked at that, I realized that sun's kind of harsh. So I did it again. I took off my hat and held it up using the shade. And that just depends on which one you like. I prefer that. I don't like the harsh light in most cases. But that's the nice thing about a dead insect. About a minute after I finished, a nice little gust of wind blew that thing right out into the lake. But for a couple of minutes, it was cooperative. And the last thing I'd tell you about, and this is actually, I want two more things. These last two are for any kind of photography. Give yourself a lot of assigned projects and do them just as hard as you were being paid to. Here's one of my latest ones, insects in flight. And birds in flight are difficult. Insects in flight, literally, still in half the pictures I take, there's not even an insect in the picture. They're there for such a brief period of time, and they zoom. But shoot enough pictures, you'll get some. And usually when it is in the picture, it's only partway in the picture or it's out of focus. You certainly don't focus stack here. It's not going to sit still for you. But insects in flight, a lot of fun. Often just focus on a flower and wait for insects to come into it, and you get some nice shots. This is not a green sweat bee. This is an orchid bee. They're in Florida. They've come up from the tropics, probably got here on their own. And it's really easy to focus these in flight. Buy some clover. I couldn't find any, so I went to Amazon, ordered a little bottle. Put one drop on the stem of a flower, and clove oil attracts these things like crazy. And it's flying all over the place around it. And that is a fairly big insect. That's not a crop picture. I literally just focused, and every time it got close, I was just firing away at 20 frames a second. But you get quite a few after a while that way. Here's a carpenter bee. Once again, I was just focusing on the flower, let it come in and get the shot. Butterflies in flight, a lot of fun. A great deal of fun. And then dragonflies, very hard to get dragonflies in flight. And I'm going to leave you with my last thing, and that's, have you seen the Colonial Life Insurance commercial Alex Trebek used to be? The 3 P's of my life insurance are what? Price, price, price. Well, the 4 P's of photography, whether it's macro photography, portrait photography, any kind, are practice, patience, persistence, and precision. And if you enjoy this hobby, you'll never master any of those 4, so you've got a lifetime to work at it. You never have to worry about it. Okay, that's it for me. If you thank you so much. I really enjoyed being here.
Nancy? Nancy?
Yeah.
Joey,
Yeah,
Shaw.
Do you have anything to say about the
Monitor. Is it not focused on the turn?
Yes, I don't know if somebody took the car, but we had it focused. Somebody in the car.
Did they see what?
Sure.
Potentials. So I should be getting an email out soon for one of them anyway.
Yeah, by the way, that shiny really sounds interesting.
Yeah.
This
Kids.
Those are sharp.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. Very nice.
Yeah, that's.
So, that email is out.
Yeah.
So the refreshing.
There.
Like that, you have to pick a date. And they only accept a certain amount of people. I think the child was 10 or 12. And that was it. So that's why it's an urgency. Wanted to call on that day, you had to sign up right away. Chances are, it was still up. And when the were thinking about it,
They do have multiple senses. No one knows if the brain is. Yeah, there's one image on a bunch of little ones. We don't know what the insect brain does. That's what they see when you take the eye and put it in a little microscope lens. This is the sort of thing you see. I mean, right now I'm seeing. Yes, if I had the glasses,
I apologize.
like this.
A few minutes, and some of they came in a little bit late. I see them back there. We have received our 501 very recently, we're going to be going back to get a permanent home. We'll have a little bit more time. We won't be as large as we here. So, anyway, thank you all for coming. If you have it, please just sign the sign-in sheet. The government sign-in sheet to get signed. You got it, Cleveland? If you all are coming, please get
Not bad.
No, right? It's flat.
That is considered the trial. But what you can do is these legs, have it come up here. And if you hold it on a lot, legs that line screws. And you can just and